There are things you experience that you can never explain with words. Things that change you so deeply inside that you never become the same person again. I'm a marine biologist. I spent years studying the ocean depths, convinced that science had an answer for everything, that every mystery was just an unsolved problem. But what we found at the bottom of the Pacific, more than 4,000 meters below the surface, shattered every certainty I ever had. It wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was something that forced me to rethink everything I believed about life, about God, about us as a species. And the most disturbing part wasn't what we saw, but what they showed us, what they made us feel without uttering a single word. This is my story, the experience that split me in two, that left me with more questions than answers, and that to this day haunts me every time I close my eyes. If you've ever wondered whether we're alone in this universe, whether there's something beyond what we were taught, I ask you to join me in this account, because what I'm about to tell you isn't in any textbook, doesn't appear in any official research, but it was as real as the air I breathe. It all started in March of 2022, when I became part of an international expedition funded by 3 universities, 2 from the United States and 1 Japanese, with additional private backing from a tech consortium interested in deep-sea mineral exploration. I was 34 years old, had my doctorate from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and had spent the better part of a decade studying extremophile organisms in hydrothermal vent systems. My specialty was understanding how life could thrive in conditions we once thought impossible, in crushing pressure, total darkness, and temperatures that could boil water or freeze it solid within meters. I thought I knew what extreme meant. I thought I understood the limits of biology. I was so wrong it's almost laughable now. Our research vessel, the Atlantis II, departed from San Diego on March 15th. We were a crew of 23 scientists from 7 different countries, engineers, a documentary team filming for a streaming platform, support staff. The mission parameters were straightforward. Explore a previously unmapped section of the Pacific Trench System southwest of the Mariana Trench. Collect geological samples, document any biological specimens, and test new deep submersible technology that could withstand pressures exceeding 1,000 atmospheres. I was assigned to the biology team alongside Dr. Chen Wei from Taiwan, Dr. Marcus Okonkwo from Nigeria, and 2 graduate students, Sarah from Boston and Javier from Mexico City. We were excited, ambitious, ready to make our mark on the scientific community. The first 2 weeks were routine. We mapped the seafloor using sonar, sent down unmanned probes, collected water samples at various depths. The documentary crew interviewed us constantly, asking us to explain our work in ways that general audiences could understand, to express our excitement about the unknown. I remember telling the camera that the deep ocean was Earth's final frontier, that we knew more about the surface of Mars than we did about our own planet's abyssal zones. I meant every word. I believed we were on the edge of understanding something profound about how resilient life could be. But I still thought in terms of microbes, of tube worms, of evolutionary adaptation. I never imagined we'd find intelligence down there. I never imagined we'd find them. It was April 2nd when everything changed. We were investigating a particularly deep section of the trench, nearly 4,300 meters down, where our sonar had detected unusual geometric formations on the ocean floor. At first, we assumed it was a natural formation, maybe columnar basalt or some kind of crystalline structure created by mineral deposits. But Dr. Chen noticed something odd in the readings. The formations were too regular, too precise, with angles and proportions that seemed deliberately constructed. He wanted to send down the manned submersible, the Trieste I-4, a state-art deep-sea vehicle that could hold 3 people and stay down for up to 18 hours. Captain Morrison was hesitant. We were at the edge of the submersible's operational depth, and any malfunction at that pressure would be instantly fatal. But the scientific curiosity won out. It always does. I volunteered immediately. Dr. Chen was going as primary investigator, and we needed a biologist in case we encountered any organisms. Marcus wanted to come too, but there were only 3 seats, and the third went to Lieutenant Parker, a Navy engineer who specialized in deep-sea systems and emergency protocols. I remember kissing my St. Christopher medal before we sealed the hatch, a habit from childhood that I thought I'd outgrown. My grandmother gave it to me before she died, told me it would protect me in my travels. I'm not a particularly religious person, wasn't raised with strict Catholic doctrine like many people I knew, but in that moment, 4,000 meters of black water above us, I felt the need for something beyond science to hold on to. The descent took nearly 3 hours. The interior of the submersible was cramped, filled with equipment, monitors displaying depth, pressure, oxygen levels, external temperature. We communicated with the surface through a tethered cable, though everyone knew that if something went wrong, they couldn't help us. We were on our own. The water outside the reinforced viewport changed from blue to deep blue to purple to absolute black. At 2,000 meters, we turned on the external lights, powerful LED arrays that cut through the darkness like white knives. I saw the occasional jellyfish drift past, translucent and ghostly. At 3,000 meters, even those disappeared. We were in a realm where sunlight had never reached, where the concept of day and night had no meaning. Dr. Chen was monitoring the sonar, guiding Lieutenant Parker toward the geometric formations. The seafloor here was a landscape of black volcanic rock, covered in fine sediment that puffed up in clouds whenever the submersible's thrusters disturbed it. And then, through the murk, we saw them. Structures, not natural formations, not mineral deposits. Structures. They rose from the ocean floor like a city built by beings who understood geometry in ways we didn't. Towers, if you could call them that, smooth and seamless, made of a material that reflected our lights in strange ways, not quite metallic, not quite organic, something in between. The angles were wrong, not impossible, but uncomfortable to look at, like they existed in more dimensions than our eyes could properly process. Some of the structures were intact, others had partially collapsed, covered in what looked like centuries of biological growth, anemones, sponges, deep-sea corals that had claimed the surfaces as their own. But underneath that living patina, you could see the original construction, precise and deliberate. Nobody spoke for at least 2 minutes. We just stared, our minds trying to categorize what we were seeing, trying to fit it into some framework that made sense. Dr. Chen finally whispered, "Oh my God," his voice barely audible over the hum of the life support systems. Lieutenant Parker started taking readings, radiation levels, electromagnetic signatures, anything that might tell us what we were looking at. I pressed my face against the viewport, my breath fogging the glass, looking for any sign of who or what had built this place. "We should report this to the surface," Parker said, his hand moving toward the communications panel. But Dr. Chen stopped him. "Wait, just wait. Let's document first. Let's make sure we're seeing what we think we're seeing." There was fear in his voice, but also wonder, the kind of exhilaration that comes from standing on the edge of something that will change everything. I understood that feeling. I felt it too. But underneath it was something else, something that made my skin prickle, a sense that we were intruding somewhere we didn't belong. We maneuvered the submersible closer, Parker's hands steady on the controls, despite the tremor I could see in his jaw. The structures extended. In all directions, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, disappearing into the darkness beyond our lights. Some were tall and thin, others broad and low, connected by what looked like bridges or walkways, though eroded and broken in places. The scale was massive, easily the size of a small city, and it was clear that whatever had been here for a very, very long time. The biological colonization suggested centuries, possibly millennia, How had this never been discovered before? How had something this significant remained hidden? As we moved through what I can only describe as streets, corridors between the structures, I noticed something that made my heart race. Openings, doorways. They were the wrong size, too tall and narrow for human proportions, maybe 3 meters high but less than a meter wide. And inside those openings, there was only darkness. Our lights couldn't penetrate far. Dr. Chen wanted to position the submersible to look inside one of the larger structures, but Parker was getting nervous. We're at 4,300 meters, we've been down for 3 hours, we should be heading back up. But none of us wanted to leave. How could we? This was the discovery of the millennium, of human history. This was proof that we weren't alone, that intelligence had evolved elsewhere, that they had been here, on Earth, in our oceans, long before we even knew how to make fire. That's when we saw the light. Not our light, their light. It came from inside one of the structures, a soft bioluminescent glow pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Blue-green, the color of deep ocean plankton, but brighter, more intentional. We all saw it at the same time. The submersible went silent except for the mechanical systems. "That's not possible," I heard myself say. My voice sounding strange and distant. Nothing should be alive in there. Nothing should be producing light. But even as I said it, I knew I was wrong. Something was alive. Something was active. Lieutenant Parker reached for the communications panel again, but before he could activate it, the light intensified, flooding out of the structure and surrounding our submersible. It didn't hurt to look at, didn't blind us, but it filled everything, pressing against the viewport like liquid. And then I felt it. We all felt it. A presence. Not physical, not something we could see, but something that touched our minds, gentle but undeniable, like someone had opened a door in my consciousness I didn't know existed. Images flooded my awareness, not through my eyes, but directly into my thoughts. I saw Earth from space, beautiful and blue, but younger, different continents, different arrangements of land and sea. I saw ships, if you could call them that, descending from the stars, massive and organic-looking, moving through the atmosphere like living things. I saw beings, tall and impossibly slender, with skin that seemed to shimmer between solid and translucent, with eyes that were too large, too dark, too knowing. They moved through water as easily as through air, their bodies designed for both environments, or maybe for neither, maybe for something in between that we couldn't comprehend. I saw them building, not with tools or machines, but with will, with intention, shaping, matter through means I couldn't understand, the structures rising from the ocean floor like plants growing in time-lapse. I saw them living here, thriving here, a civilization that existed in Earth's deep oceans millions of years ago, long before humanity, long before mammals, maybe even before complex life had colonized the land. They were explorers, I understood somehow, travelers who had come to Earth when it was a different world, who had made the oceans their home because the depths reminded them of wherever they had come from. But then the images changed. I saw catastrophe. I saw Earth convulsing, tectonic plates shifting violently, underwater volcanoes erupting en masse, the ocean itself boiling in places. I saw their cities crumbling, their people dying, their ships trying to escape but failing, pulled down by forces too powerful to resist. An extinction event. Not the one that killed the dinosaurs, something older, something from the deep geological past, something that had erased nearly all evidence of their existence. Most of them died, but not all. The light pulled back slightly, and I could see the interior of the submersible again, see Dr. Chen with tears streaming down his face, see Lieutenant Parker's hands frozen on the controls, his eyes wide and unfocused. I knew they were seeing what I was seeing, experiencing what I was experiencing. We were being shown their history, their tragedy, their truth. But why? Why us? Why now? The presence in my mind shifted, became more focused, more personal. I felt it searching through my memories, gently, carefully, like someone paging through a book they didn't want to damage. It saw my childhood, my grandmother teaching me to pray, my years in university, my failed marriage, my obsession with understanding life in extreme environments. It saw my doubts, my fears, my hope that my work mattered, that I was contributing something meaningful to human knowledge. And then it showed me something else. It showed me what they had learned, living in Earth's oceans for millions of years, existing in the deep darkness where pressure crushed everything, where no light ever reached. They had learned that consciousness wasn't dependent on complexity, that awareness could exist in the simplest forms, that the universe itself was suffused with something we might call spirit, for lack of a better word, and that intelligence was just one expression of that underlying reality. They had learned that separation was an illusion, that every living thing, every atom, every quantum fluctuation was connected in ways that transcended space and time. They had learned what humans spent millennia trying to understand through religion, through philosophy, through mysticism, and they had learned it through direct experience, through evolving in an environment that forced them to perceive reality differently than land-dwelling creatures ever could. But here's what disturbed me most, what still disturbs me years later. They showed me that humanity was on the same path they had been on, that our civilization, our technology, our confidence that we could control and understand everything was leading us toward our own catastrophe. Not because we were evil or stupid, but because we had forgotten something essential, something they had understood too late. We had forgotten that we were part of something larger, that the Earth wasn't a resource to exploit, but a living system we were woven into, and that pulling too hard on any thread could unravel everything. They didn't show me this as judgment. There was no anger in the presence, no condemnation, only sadness, only a kind of cosmic grief that something so beautiful, so full of potential, was making the same mistakes they had made. They showed me possible futures, timelines branching out from the present moment, some where humanity learned in time, where we changed course, where we survived and thrived and eventually joined a larger community of conscious beings spread across the universe. But others where we didn't, where our oceans acidified beyond recovery, where our climate spiraled into chaos, where our own innovations turned against us and left the planet as silent and empty as their cities had become. Have you ever felt something so profound that it changed how you see everything, even though you couldn't fully explain it? Have you experienced a moment where reality seemed to peel back and show you something underneath, something that made you question every assumption you'd built your life on? Write in the comments what you felt, because I need to know I'm not alone in this, that someone else understands what it's like to carry knowledge that doesn't fit into normal conversation, that makes you feel isolated even when you're surrounded by people. The light began to fade, slowly, reluctantly, like a hand letting go after a long embrace. The presence withdrew from my mind, leaving behind an emptiness that was almost painful. I gasped, sucking in air like I'd been underwater even though I'd been breathing normally the whole time. Dr. Chen was sobbing openly now, his hands covering his face. Lieutenant Parker had gone pale, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The submersible drifting slightly in, the current, the dark structures surrounding us like silent witnesses. Parker finally found his voice. We need to surface. We need to tell them. We need to. But he couldn't finish the sentence. Tell them what? That we'd found an alien city. That we'd been contacted telepathically. That we'd been Given a spiritual revelation about the fate of humanity? Who would believe us? What evidence did we have besides our own testimony and whatever footage the external cameras had captured, which would probably show nothing but lights and structures, nothing that could convey what we'd actually experienced? Dr. Chen wiped his face, his hands shaking. We document everything. We collect samples. We do this properly, scientifically. We can't let our experience cloud the physical evidence. He was trying to regain his professional composure, trying to fit this into a framework that made sense. I understood the impulse. I felt it too. But I also knew it was futile. How do you scientifically measure a communication that happened outside of normal sensory channels? How do you quantify the feeling of ancient intelligence touching your consciousness? We spent another hour exploring, Parker navigating the submersible through the ruins, while Dr. Chen and I operated the sample collection arms, gathering pieces of the strange material the structures were made from, scraping biological samples from the surfaces, documenting everything with still cameras and video. The whole time I kept looking for another sign of the presence, another flash of that blue-green light. But the structures remained dark and silent. Whatever had reached out to us had withdrawn, leaving us with our instruments and our inadequate words. The ascent back to the surface was excruciating. 3 hours of decompression stops. Sitting in the cramped submersible, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Parker broke the silence once, asking if we were going to tell the truth about what happened down there. Dr. Chen said we'd tell them about the structures, about the physical evidence, about what we documented. He didn't say anything about the rest of it, neither did I, because how could we? We'd be dismissed as having experienced some kind of shared hallucination, nitrogen narcosis, even though we were in a pressurized environment, stress-induced psychosis, anything but what actually happened, Lee. When we surfaced, it was dark, the night sky filled with more stars than I'd ever seen. The Atlantis II lit up like a Christmas tree against the black ocean. The deck crew secured the submersible and opened the hatch, and I climbed out on shaking legs, breathing fresh air that tasted impossibly sweet. Captain Morrison wanted a full debrief immediately, but Dr. Chen negotiated for us to have an hour to decompress, to shower, to eat something. I went to my cabin and sat on my bunk, still in my damp clothes, staring at nothing. I tried to pray. I wanted to feel the comfort I remembered from childhood, from my grandmother's faith, from the certainty that there was something larger that cared about us, that had a plan. But the words wouldn't come. How do you pray when you've been shown that God, if such a thing exists, is so much stranger and more complex than any human religion has ever imagined? How do you ask for help when you've seen that we're responsible for our own fate, that no intervention is coming, that we have to choose our path ourselves? The debrief was chaotic. We showed them the footage, the structures clearly visible in the submersible's lights, undeniably artificial, undeniably extraordinary. The scientists erupted in excitement, theories flying, plans being made to send down more submersibles, to collect more samples, to analyze everything we'd brought back. The documentary crew wanted us to describe what we saw, how we felt, what this meant for science. I tried to answer, tried to sound professional and measured, but I kept seeing those images in my mind, kept feeling that presence, that cosmic sadness. Dr. Chen pulled me aside later that night, after most people had gone to bed, and we stood on the deck looking out at the dark ocean. "Do we tell them the rest?" he asked quietly. "About what we felt, about what we were shown." I looked at him, at this brilliant scientist who'd spent his life pursuing empirical truth, and I saw that he was as lost as I was. "I don't know if they'd believe us," I said. "I don't know if I'd believe us if I hadn't been there." He nodded slowly. "But it happened," he said. "It was real. And we have to do something with it, with what they showed us." We can't just pretend it was nothing. But what could we do? We were scientists, not prophets, not activists, not spiritual leaders. We studied organisms and ecosystems and geological processes. We published papers and gave lectures and applied for grants. We weren't equipped to deliver a message about humanity's fate, about consciousness and connection, and the mistakes that lead to extinction. And yet, that's exactly what had been given to us. Not as facts we could prove, but as experienced truth, as gnosis, if you want to use the old religious term, direct knowledge that bypassed rational thought and settled into someplace deeper. The expedition continued for another 3 weeks. We sent down multiple submersible missions, mapped the entire site, collected hundreds of samples. The structures were real. The material analysis showed elements we recognized, but in configurations we couldn't fully explain, as if they'd been arranged at a molecular level in ways our current technology couldn't replicate. The biological samples showed organisms we'd never documented before, species that seemed to have evolved specifically in and around the ruins, as if the structures themselves had created a unique micro-ecosystem. But we never saw the light again. We never felt that presence. Whatever had reached out to us on that first dive had said what it needed to say and gone silent. Or maybe it was still there, watching, waiting to see what we'd do with what we'd been given. The scientific papers that came out of our expedition made international news. Ancient underwater structures of unknown origin, possible evidence of pre-human intelligence on Earth, revolutionary implications for our understanding of evolution and civilization. My name was attached to 3 major publications. My career skyrocketed. I was offered positions at top research institutions, invited to speak at conferences around the world. I should have been thrilled. This was everything I'd worked for: recognition, respect, the knowledge that I'd contributed something significant to human understanding. But I felt hollow. Because all the papers, all the analysis, all the academic discussion missed the point entirely. We were treating it like an archaeological curiosity, like an interesting puzzle to solve, when what we'd actually encountered was a warning, a message, a plea from beings who had walked the same path we're walking now and paid the ultimate price. I tried to talk about it carefully, in interviews and lectures. I'd mentioned the spiritual dimension of the discovery, the questions it raised about consciousness and interconnection, about our responsibility to the planet and to future generations. Some people responded positively, especially those who already believed that science and spirituality weren't incompatible, that there were ways of knowing beyond the empirical method. But most of the scientific community dismissed those comments as unprofessional, as letting emotion cloud judgment, as straying from the evidence into speculation and mysticism. Dr. Chen had a breakdown 6 months after we returned. I heard through colleagues that he'd left his position at the university, that he'd moved to a monastery in Taiwan, that he was studying Buddhism and meditation, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced through a different framework than science could provide. Lieutenant Parker left the Navy and became an environmental activist, getting arrested at pipeline protests, chaining himself to logging equipment. His whole demeanor changed from the controlled military professional I'd known. He sent me an email once, just one line. "We have to stop them from making the same mistakes. We have to try." I wanted to respond, to tell him I understood, but I didn't know what to say. I kept working, because what else was there to do? I published more papers, took a position at UC San Diego, mentored graduate students, applied for grants to continue deep-sea research. But every time I dove, every time I went below the sunlit surface into the depths, I felt them watching. Not in a frightening way, not threatening, just present, aware, hoping maybe that we'd understand, that we'd change course before it was too late. I started having dreams, not nightmares exactly, but vivid experiences where I'd be back in that submersible, surrounded by that blue-green light, and the presence would show me more. It would show me the Earth 1,000 years from now, in the timeline where we don't change. Oceans dark and lifeless, coastlines submerged, the weather systems chaotic and violent, human civilization reduced to scattered survivors fighting over scraps. And then it would show me the other timeline, the one where we wake up, where we recognize our connection to everything around us, where we use our intelligence and creativity not to dominate and extract, but to harmonize and restore, where we survive and eventually thrive and join that larger community of conscious beings they had hinted at. The choice point, the present seemed to say without words, is now. Not in some distant future, not when the consequences are already locked in, but now, in this moment, in every decision we make about how to live, what to consume, what to value, how to treat each other and the living systems we depend on. I'm 41 now. 7 years have passed since that dive. I still work as a marine biologist, still study the deep ocean, still try to understand life in extreme environments. But I also do something else. I talk to people, anyone who'll listen, about what I experienced, about what was shown to me. Not as proven fact, not as scientific certainty, but as personal testimony, as something that changed me in ways I'm still processing. Some people think I'm crazy. Some think I'm exploiting my scientific credentials to push a religious or environmental agenda. Some think the pressure at depth affected my brain, that I experienced some kind of neurological event that created false memories. I understand all those reactions. I'd probably have them too if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't felt what I felt. But others understand. Others have had their own experiences, their own moments where reality seemed to show them something beyond the material, beyond the measurable, something that changed how they see their place in the universe. They write to me, share their stories, tell me they felt less alone after hearing mine. And that's something, at least. That's a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of human consciousness, one person touching another, sharing experienced truth that can't be proven, but can be recognized by those who felt something similar. I still wear my St. Christopher medal. I still catch myself praying sometimes, though my prayers are different now. Less about asking for specific things, and more about expressing gratitude for being part of this mysterious, beautiful, fragile web of existence. I don't know if anyone's listening to those prayers, if there's a God in the traditional sense, or if consciousness is something more distributed, more woven into the fabric of reality itself. But I feel less alone than I used to, less like I'm just a random collection of cells that happen to become self-aware on a random planet in an indifferent universe. The beings we found at the bottom of the Pacific, whether they're still there in some form or whether what touched us was just an echo, a recording left behind in the structures themselves, they showed me that intelligence isn't rare, that consciousness permeates everything, that we're part of a story so much larger than the brief span of human civilization. They showed me that our choices matter, not because some external judge is keeping score, but because we're woven into everything around us, and what we do reverberates through systems we can't fully see or understand. They showed me that spiritual revelation isn't about following someone else's dogma or accepting someone else's truth. It's about direct experience, about being willing to have your assumptions shattered, about staying open to the possibility that reality is stranger and more wonderful than we can imagine. And yes, sometimes more terrifying too, because with that openness comes responsibility, the weight of knowing that we're not separate from the consequences of our actions, that there's no one coming to save us from ourselves. I don't have answers. I don't have a solution to climate change or ecosystem collapse or the 1,000 other ways we're pushing Earth systems toward tipping points. I'm just one person, one marine biologist, who had an experience that doesn't fit into conventional categories, who's trying to make sense of it years later, who's trying to honor what was shown to me by living differently, choosing differently, speaking up even when it's uncomfortable or professionally risky. But I'll tell you what I do have. I have the memory of that presence, that ancient intelligence that survived the death of its civilization and lingered in the deep places of Earth, hoping maybe that another species would arise, would develop technology and consciousness, would face the same tests they faced, and would choose more wisely. I have the images they shared, the possible futures, the branching timelines, the knowledge that our fate isn't fixed, that every moment offers an opportunity to turn toward connection instead of separation, toward regeneration instead of extraction, toward humility instead of arrogance. And I have hope, not blind optimism, not the assumption that everything will work out fine without effort, but the kind of hope that's really just determination, the refusal to give up even when the challenges seem overwhelming, the commitment to try, to speak truth as I understand it, to live as if our choices matter because they do. So here I am, sharing this story with you, knowing some will dismiss it, some will misunderstand it, some will use it to confirm whatever beliefs they already held, but hoping that maybe, for some of you, it will resonate, will touch something you've felt but couldn't articulate, will remind you that you're part of something larger, something mysterious and sacred and worth protecting. The beings at the bottom of the Pacific didn't give me certainty. They gave me questions. They didn't give me proof. They gave me experience. They didn't tell me what to think. They showed me what they'd learned, what they wished they'd understood sooner, and left it to me, to us, to decide what to do with that knowledge. I still go diving. I still feel most at peace when I'm underwater, surrounded by the blue darkness, by the alien beauty of life forms that evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill me in seconds without technology. And sometimes, in the deep quiet, I feel that presence again, faint but unmistakable, like a hand on my shoulder, a reminder that I'm not alone, that we're not alone, that consciousness reaches across vast distances and timescales to touch itself, to recognize itself, to offer what comfort and guidance it can. What we do with that touch, that recognition, that guidance, is up to us. The beings who built those cities in the ocean depths learned too late. We still have time. Not much, maybe, but enough, if we choose wisely, if we choose together, if we remember that we're not separate from the earth, or from each other, or from the vast web of life and consciousness that we're part of. That's what disturbed me most about their spiritual revelation. Not that it was frightening or incomprehensible, but that it was so simple, so obvious once you saw it, and yet so easy to forget, to dismiss, to ignore in favor of short-term convenience and comfort. They showed me that the truth was always there, available to anyone willing to look deeply enough, to question their assumptions, to accept that reality might be more than the material, measurable surface we usually focus on. I don't know if this story will change anything for you. I don't know if sharing what I experienced will make any difference in the larger scheme of things. But I had to try, because that's what the presence taught me, in the end. That trying matters, that bearing witness matters, that speaking truth even when it's difficult or uncertain matters. Because we're all connected, and what touches one of us touches all of us, in ways we can't always see but can sometimes feel if we're paying attention. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me through this account of something I can't fully prove but know with every fiber of my being was real. If it resonated with you, if it touched something in your own experience, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Share what you felt, what moments have changed how you see reality. What experiences have left you questioning everything you thought you knew? Let's create a space where these things can be spoken, where we don't have to pretend we only believe in what can be measured and weighed, where we can acknowledge the mystery without fear of judgment. And if you want to hear more stories like this, explorations of the strange and unexplainable, accounts of experiences that challenge our understanding of reality, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're all searching for meaning, for connection, for some sense that our lives matter in the vast scheme of existence. maybe together, sharing our stories, listening to each other's truths. We can find our way forward toward the timeline where we learn in time, where we choose wisely, where we honor the gift of consciousness and the fragile, beautiful world that birthed us. The ocean still holds its secrets. The deep places still harbor mysteries we've barely begun to explore. And, somewhere, 4,300 meters down, in the darkness where no sunlight ever reaches, ancient structures stand as testament to what was and what could be again if we're not careful, or what we could transcend if we're willing to learn from those who came before. I'll keep diving. I'll keep searching. I'll keep listening for that presence, hoping for another chance to understand more clearly, to receive more guidance, to be reminded that we're not alone in this vast universe, that intelligence and consciousness are woven into reality itself, that the choices we make echo across scales we can barely imagine. That's all any of us can do, really. Keep searching, keep questioning, keep trying to understand, keep choosing as wisely as we can with the knowledge we have. Keep hoping that it's enough, that we're enough, that love and awareness and connection will be enough to tip the balance toward the future where we survive and thrive and eventually take our place among the community of conscious beings that the universe seems designed to create. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for considering that maybe, just maybe, reality is stranger and more wonderful than we've been taught, and that there's still time to learn, to change, to choose differently. The ocean remembers. The beings at the bottom of the Pacific remember. And now, you remember too. What you do with that memory is up to you.